That out afterwards, I guess.
All right. Hey, this is Sean Devaney from Heavy.com Sports. I'm here with Steve Bulpett, our NBA insider. We're about a week away from the NBA trade deadline. At this time next week, everything in the NBA is going to be completely different. Everything we thought we knew about the NBA will be completely different. Everybody's going to be traded. Every team is going to look extremely different. Isn't that right, Steve?
I think their ledger books will look different. Um, I think that's probably where you're going to find the greatest. I no, actually, I do think there will be some moves made.
Yeah.
I think there are teams that are going to be moving on from some players, and guys who maybe weren't available might be. And I do think the finance part will have something to do with that. But yeah, the big blockbuster stuff, unless Philadelphia and Brooklyn get together on Simmons and Harden, then I'm not sure anything really, blockbuster gets done. But that's what I'm
Yeah.
hearing so far.
Yeah.
It could change by the time we finish this video.
Yeah, right. And we'll get back to Simmons and Harden because I do think that's interesting. That's something that you reported on earlier. But one piece that you kind of mentioned in the story you're just putting out today is that I think there's been an assumption, me among them, that Josh Richardson of the Celtics was very much on the market and was basically a contract. Like the Celtics were just looking at him as a number. And if we can move off that number, then great. Not necessarily so, though, from what you're hearing.
No, look, Josh Richardson's got a lot of fans around the league. I'm not talking about fans among the fans. I'm talking about in front offices. And I think that there were teams that were kind of lined up to go make a run at him, and they were finding the Celtics were more than a little hesitant. They're listening. The Celtics will listen to anything. You can call and ask them about Jason Tatum, and they'll listen. But if you're not providing, if Milwaukee called and just tossed Giannis's name out there, I think the Celtics would listen.
Sure.
I think they like a lot of what Richardson does, and he is someone that could be dealt with off-season wise as well, if they decide to move on. Or again, if the right deal comes along, he could be gone by Thursday. But I don't think there's. I think the Celtics like what they're doing recently. I think the management likes what's been happening recently, and they'd like to see it continue. And they think that Richardson's a big part of that.
Yeah, and certainly the way the Celtics have played recently, might change some thinking around the trade deadline. Where, look, if you can unload somebody, or not if, I mean, I think they're going to unload somebody to get under the tax. If it's something where they don't have to give up much to do that, and it can pretty much keep this group going forward and just see what it can do. In an Eastern Conference that's very much up for grabs, and an NBA really right now that's very much up for grabs with everything that's going on. I think they'd be willing to do that, and that's not the most exciting thing, I'm sure, for Celtics fans to hear, but that's entirely possible between now and next week.
I think the Celtics, if they had their way, would like to have a few more meaningful games against really good competition between now and the deadline. I mean, they've got Detroit tonight, they've got Orlando coming up, and then they've got Brooklyn at Brooklyn, and that'll be the Nets without Kyrie because it's a home game, and without Durant. So, if they could get a better gauge on where they are right now, and if what they're seeing right now is going to continue, the Celtics have played well at different times this season, even early on, when everyone was frustrated with them, they're themselves included. but they haven't been able to carry it from game to game or even from quarter to quarter. So, if they had a chance to see more of it and to believe more in it, I think they'd be more comfortable. But, it also remains true that their best opportunity for making good deals, for being flexible in the kinds of deals they can make, will come in the off season. They've still got those two good-sized trade exceptions from Evan Fournier and Tristan Thompson, and things like that can help immensely in making deals.
Yeah, and it's a good point that I think you've got to look at, that they're not just looking at the trade deadline on Thursday as this is when we've got to do something. They're looking at, like, what are we going to do in the next 6 months? They're looking at, how are we going to transition this team? And I don't think, again, I don't think any fan wants to hear that this is sort of a transition year, but I think it is. When you look at what they did, and you've talked about this before about bringing in some veterans and bringing in some sort of bridge players, and then getting to a point next year where maybe over the summer they can try for the home run, and I think they'll be in much better position to do that. Again, I'm Sean Devaney from Heavy.com Sports, and this is Steve Bulpett from Heavy.com. He's our NBA insider. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them here in the stream. But Steve, just if you can address that a little bit about what might be there in the summer for them, that's not going to be here on February 10th.
Well, to start with right now, and is there a move out there or a deal or two that's available that you think would take the Celtics as they are now and make them a true contender for the championship? And I don't see, it's hard to picture that right now. And I think the Celtics organization is looking at it similarly, that they don't want to do something now that could hinder what is available in the summer. Things get more valuable in the summer when you can say, I'll trade you my...
has also created a rapid rise in security threats.
Whoa, and you heard something? Oh, something weird came in there. I'm sorry, I get knocked off track here by that. But you can say, I'll trade you my first round draft pick right now. But where's that pick when you get toward the off season, the week before the draft, and where that pick is, and teams may have honed in on a player that they may want with that pick, then the pick becomes more valuable because it becomes more tangible. It's easier to identify exactly what it is.
Yeah, and I think when you get to the summer too, you have Robert Williams' contract extension kicking in. He's got what they call a poison pill now, which is basically he's signed the extension. It doesn't kick in until next year, so he's still on his rookie deal this year. So it becomes really hard to trade. It becomes much easier to trade next year. Not saying that they want to trade him, but just that if you're going to go for a superstar player, you've got to give up something, obviously. And you'd have to presume that if there's a team out there that's going to be looking for something from the Celtics, then Robert Williams is probably going to be at the top of the list.
It's funny because Robert Williams isn't on the food chain, isn't someone you'd look at as being above a Jason Tatum or a Jaylen Brown, but in terms of what the Celtics have behind him, he's almost more untouchable because, what are you going to do without him based on what you have now? One of the earlier stories I did, I mentioned that if the Celtics hadn't done the deal, hadn't wanted to get off Kemba's contract as badly as they did, and hadn't made the deal with Oklahoma City, bringing back Al Horford, but also sending out the 16th pick, if they had kept that pick, the guy they were going to go for is the center Sengun, who wound up being taken with that pick and going to Houston.
Yeah.
So, if you had him, then a Robert Williams becomes more available. But right now, your big men are Robert and Al Horford, who, doubt it's hard to see him here next year unless he redoes his deal, and Ennis Freedom. So, it's hard. It would be hard to go into the next season and having dealt Robert Williams, I would think.
Yeah. I want to get back to that, but I do want to address a question from Jared Carson here, who says, what's the odds that the Celtics can trade Schroeder for a young and up-and-coming player like a Jalen Smith, who's kind of useless for the Suns right now? Another name I've heard is Josh Green from the Mavericks. What's sort of a realistic haul that they could expect? I mean, if you could get Jalen Smith, I'm all in on it. I mean, even if he doesn't pan out, I would rather take a chance on a young guy like that and see what he can do. Or Josh Green, somebody like that. I would much rather take a chance on a young guy and have him not pan out than whatever, get 2 second-round picks or get something back in return that a veteran who probably isn't going to play that much for you.
Well, if the deal is structured in a way that allows the Celtics to still get under the luxury tax, then I think those kind of guys are possible. Or it would require a larger deal.
Yeah.
Dennis Schroeder has value. He's a guy that a contending team could look at and say, here's a guy that's a veteran that knows how to play, that you can trust in a playoff situation where it becomes more of a possession game and it slows down a little bit. Because I think if there's an issue that the Celtics have had with Dennis Schroeder this season, it's been that he's not been pushing the ball, not been pushing the pace as much as they'd like. I think the Celtics would love to just move on if they could move on from Schroeder, not necessarily take something back that they have to deal with financially. They do have some smaller exceptions that they could still use a bit, but I think it's going to be important for them to for the way that they want to play, to get Peyton Pritchard into the lineup and into the rotation. And, it may take him a week or two to get his bearings after being essentially in the witness protection program. But, I think that's a way that they would, it would be good for them to go. And I think that there's a strong push for that within the organization.
Do you think, though, that they put themselves in a corner a little bit with Schroeder in that it's become clear to everyone in the league that they want to get off of his contract. That's the most important thing. And so other teams are saying, I'm not going to give you anything because I know you want to get rid of this guy.
Yeah, but there's more than one team that would be interested in him.
So you've got to create the market. They've got to be able to create the market.
Yeah. So, I mean, in that case, it's like, do you want to wait it out or don't you? You know what I mean? And again, if you're going to give up something of value for Schroeder, again, if there's teams, more than one team interested, that could happen. But it would require a larger deal anyway, I would think. So, I think the Celtics will be able to kind of get what they want. Because like I said, there certainly is room for Dennis Schroeder on a team that's making something of a push this year. I mean, the Celtics thought they were going to be one of those teams.
I think Chicago would be the team that would make the most sense, just because not only do they need sort of a backup point guard, and they might trade away Kobe White, which if they wind up making a move where they trade away Kobe White, then they're going to want another backup point guard. Lonzo Ball has been hurt as well, so you've got that. To me, that's a move that makes the utmost sense. And you also have the fact that of all the coaches who have ever coached Schroeder, no question, the guy who's gotten the most out of him has been Billy Donovan. So I think a deal with Chicago, and there's been talk about Troy Brown Jr. possibly, but I think a deal with Chicago probably makes the most sense there.
I wouldn't rule out Cleveland.
Oh yeah.
That's would be a spot. Look, you've got to look at where teams are and what their goals are. What the definition of success, I think we mentioned before, is different to different teams. And like I mentioned in the story we just posted, that Charlotte, needs to they haven't been in the playoffs since 2016. They need to get in and they need to do some things. And Cleveland, would also like to kind of light that fire locally. We're going to make the playoffs, but we also want to do something when we get there. And I think, as we've mentioned before, the difference between regular season basketball and playoff basketball is enormous. And a guy like Schroeder could be, and it's not like he's going to, bog you down because he's going to be free when the year's over. So you're going to be essentially renting him.
Right.
And if he helps you to kind of legitimize things and make your place look good, look, it's not the same in Boston because the Celtics don't have to worry about people going away and the Garden being half empty if they're not good. People are still going to support basketball in Boston. But you look at what happened just for the Celtics when they finished with the trade where they clear out Pierce and Garnett to Brooklyn, and the Celtics could, they take a major step back. But it was when Isaiah Thomas came here and they started winning some games that all of a sudden the Celtics became an attractive place for players to look at. I mean, all of a sudden that gets you in the Al Horford thing. And, for whatever you want to say about Horford or whether you like him or don't, he was a major free agent that year and the Celtics got him. And the next year they get Gordon Hayward, who was a major free agent with a lot of options and was looking to come here to play with Isaiah Thomas and Al Horford. And, how that thing all, got strange. And by the time he gets here, Gordon Hayward, Isaiah's gone, Kyrie's here. And, we know what happens after that with his injury. But anyway, the point is that you have to look to other free agents and just, to your own people sometimes that, hey, we're an up and coming franchise. We're a team on the move here. Phoenix made its move, right? And all of a sudden now they're expecting things. And once you make those moves, I remember, when you get a couple of major players, then it makes it easier for you to get the James Posies. Who you say, well, who's James Posey? Well, he was a major factor when the Celtics, as part of their rotation, when they won in 2008. Having a guy like that in your rotation, that kind of aggressive guy, but players like that come in for not a lot of money that, are willing to come in for that. PJ Brown comes in that year. He's basically out of the league kind of, been bought out and, he makes a contribution, but you got to be a place that guys want to come to because that allows you to fill out your roster once you've got the big money people in place. And the Celtics are going to have big money people in place with Brown and Tatum, So that's why the team is working really hard to make it work with those two guys as the basis. Because then you've got Rob Williams with reasonable money, Marcus Smart with reasonable money for what he gives you. But it looks like you need something else. Right.
And Jared Carson, just to go back to Schroeder, mentions that Jalen Smith makes less than Schroeder, and it's true. Jalen Smith makes, I think it's like $4.5 million, and Schroeder makes like 5.9, which is fine. But the Celtics, they need to get below that tax, and I think that not only do they want to get below that tax, but they might want to create a roster spot. So if they could get rid of Schroeder's contract altogether, and be in a position where they could cut PJ Dozier who makes $2 million, create a roster spot, and then sign somebody in the buyout market. I think that's really what they're looking at. So yeah, they could take back Jalen Smith and absolutely that'd be great. I think he's probably a pretty worthwhile prospect to at least take a look at. The Suns, I think, with campaign, he's had a wrist injury. I think they're a little unsure of what his future is and whether he'll be around. So, Schroeder might make some sense there, but that's I'm not sure that when they're looking to give up a guy that was a top 10 pick, I'm not sure that Schroeder's the guy. That a couple months of Schroeder is really what they're looking for in return for him.
Someone like, in terms of forget about what the Celtics would be willing to give up. I think a guy that would be a lot more attractive to Phoenix might be a Josh Richardson.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Agreed. So we've talked a little bit about the offseason and how the Celtics will have $17 million in a trade exception at that point. They'll also have the Thompson $10 million trade exemption, and we're not going to get into the nuts and bolts of the CBA here, but at the same time, we can say that you can't just combine those. So you can't say it's not a $27 million exception. It's 117 and one is 10. So you can take in players who fit in those slots. A guy that you mentioned to watch in the last story that you posted, not tonight's, but the last time was Bradley Beal. And there's been some talk that maybe he will sign an extension with the Wizards. And then there's been as much talk, and from what you're hearing, as much talk that he is not going to, and that he's going to want to investigate some other routes and some other possibilities. Let's talk Bradley Beal a little bit. What do you see in his future?
I do see a move from everything I'm hearing. Some people that I've spoken to were pretty strong about that, that maybe he's at the point where, okay, because look, everything we've heard from Bradley Beal until this point has been, no, I don't want to go anywhere else. I want to make it work out here. But when you look at where they were a few years ago, that big series with the Celtics, and and all of a sudden now they've fallen off the map. Really, it was a good deal they got for Westbrook, but the pieces haven't worked together yet, and may not. So I think it's pretty likely that they're going to at least have to investigate what they can get for Beal, and he may be pushing that as well. And there are people out there talking like that's the next thing to watch for.
I'm a Celtics fan, and you're there in the hunt, so you're not far from Boston. And there's been all this talk about Tatum and Beal have grown up together. Their mothers knew each other. All this connection. Does he wind up in Boston? What do you think?
I think I'm not sure it happens because it would still require a lot to make it work out financially, and but then again, you just don't know what Washington's going to want. I mean, there's ways to make it work, that sending the right stuff in a deal to make that work, because you'd have to do something like that. But is it going to be what Washington wants?
Yeah, and I think in the end, the Celtics would have to, do one of those deals where it's two, at minimum, maybe 3 first-round picks. I don't know that they want to get into that kind of thing. We've talked about it before, how that just does not work out for for the team sending out the picks. It never does. Whether it's the Clippers doing it for Paul George, the Lakers doing it for Anthony Davis, the Rockets doing it for Russell Westbrook. Those deals where you send out the package of 3 picks and then you have pick swaps in between. Basically, your next 5 drafts you give up for to another team for a star player. That just does not seem to work out very well. But it seems like that's what the Celtics would have to do in order to get Bradley Beal, especially if you don't want to give up Jaylen Brown. And I think you could make a deal without giving up Jaylen Brown if it's Robert Williams when his contract kicks in next year, his extension, and Marcus Smart, and then you kick in, whether it's Nesmith, Williams, maybe both of those guys. You're giving up a lot, obviously, and then you're giving up the picks in addition. But if you want to keep Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, and bring in Bradley Beal, that's pretty much the only way you're going to be able to do it.
Yeah, and again, unless they've got some very large person stashed overseas, or or in a locker at South Station, I think that it would be really hard to give up Robert Williams. And look, when his quote unquote big contract kicks in, that's for ridiculously reasonable money for starting big.
Absolutely, yes. I'm just saying that compared to the current contract, it's a big contract.
Well, it's it's about a $6 million or so raise. But it's funny. When we were covering the lockout back in 2011, I spent more time I think I was legally eligible to vote in New York. I spent so much time there that fall. But we started looking at, they're trying to figure out, the cap and this, and, with how you're going to do things. And the smaller market teams are bitching about this and that. When you look at it and study how successful teams get built, unless it's a case of a bunch of free agents getting together, one of the major keys is drafting well and having really good players under very manageable contracts until such time as they need to get the big money. When you get a guy and you have him under his rookie contract, Steph Curry and Kevin Durant and all those guys were not making their market value for a number of years. So having those kind of guys allows you to put, guys, veterans with making bigger money who may not even be as good, but that you need to fill out and make a championship contending team. But that's, having those kind of young guys. So the draft pick thing is really important. So, I think unless you are in a go right now, this guy that we're trading for is going to put us over the top right now. And we can see it. And even then, you've got to get lucky that there's no major injuries, right?
Yeah.
But absent that, I just don't think you give away draft picks.
No, I agree. I think though that if Tatum's your guy and you're going to you're committed to that, and you have a chance to bring in Beal, who's maybe the one guy who can get the most out of Tatum, and you really want to see where this goes. I love Robert Williams. I think what he does is absolutely unique. Absolutely. I do think though that in the current NBA, you can get another center. I mean, I look around and I look at the Knicks with Mitchell Robinson, who's pretty good center, who's a second round pick, or Richaun Holmes in Sacramento, who was a undrafted. I just think you can get a big guy, who's serviceable if you've got enough else. If you've got everything else in place, I think you can do it. So for me, if I'm giving up Robert Williams, if it's Josh Richardson, Marcus Smart, and a couple of picks, maybe one of the young guys, maybe 2 picks.
You're giving up Rob Williams and Marcus Smart?
Maybe. Yeah, sure.
I'm not.
You're not going to do that.
No, I'm not doing that.
No.
Look, and yeah. I don't know if you want to stick on this point.
No, the Bradley Beal, the one thing that might get you a discount on him too is that he averaged 31 points last year. He's averaged 23 points this year. So something's going on there at 28 years old. So with a big contract coming up, that's certainly there's something there that maybe you don't have to give up both of those guys to get him, but.
If you're the Wizards, and you're looking to make a deal with Boston, yeah, it's going to be a player, it's going to be a pick. But from Washington, I'd say, look, I don't necessarily want your first round pick, depending on how the Celtics finish this year. I want you to go out and get me a better first round pick, because you're gonna have to do some. Obviously, I think you already are in a rebuilding phase in Washington, and those young guys have got to develop more, But look, everyone talks about second round picks as if they don't mean anything, and they're I'll give you a ton of second round picks if you want. I think those guys. I think the Celtics have done well with second round picks.
They have.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's been some. Well, I'm saying over the years, they've done pretty well.
Johnson.
Pardon me?
Jawan Johnson, he won
a first round pick, wasn't he?
Oh, Jawan Johnson. Yeah, actually, he was a first round pick. Right?
Wasn't Glenn Davis a second round pick? Or
yeah. That's
what I'm saying is it? And you didn't let me finish the sentence. So I think they've done pretty well with second round picks, but I think they could have done a lot better. I think those are the picks that you take and you spend on, the really young, let's take a shot at a guy over in Europe that is not nearly ready now, but that may be ready, in 2 or 3 years. What would you give to get a guy that is stuck over there for a while, but comes to you more filled out? I mean, the guy Sengun is again, the Celtics liked him a lot. He would have been their pick if they'd have stayed at 16 last draft. But there's a guy that is really young, but has been playing with adults, all his life. He's a tough kid. So you look at where is he now and say, well, he's okay, but don't just look at where he is now. Look at where he can be. What's his work ethic like? What are his physicals like? What are his tools like? Size-wise, is he still growing into his body? How is he with dexterity and things like that? Especially for big guys, it takes them longer to grow into their bodies. There's more body to grow into.
Yeah, right. Well, sure.
But, so being able to project and things like that, I think those second-round picks, give me a whole handful of them,
Yeah.
Especially the stash guys. The guys that you can keep overseas and allow to develop while they're not on your books.
Right. That's the big thing is they're not on your books and you don't have the clock on them the way that you do with other picks. Jared Carson agrees with you saying that adding Beal but giving up Smart and Rob Williams would not make the Celtics better. They would lack much grit and depth. I think grit is something you can replace. To me, there's a lot of gritty guys out there you can get, but that's just me. And one other thing that
reminds me, I got to stop there. It reminds me of something McHale had said. This is like a billion years ago when he was still playing, so it had to be a long time ago. He kept hearing, he said, I'm tired of this hearing that they play hard, because I can get you 5 plumbers out there that'll play hard, but can play.
Right. And I love those guys, and everybody loves those guys.
But I'm saying, but it's got to be. It can't just be. You can't just say I can go out and get some grit. They've got to be able to play too.
Sure. I understand.
And they've got to be in the right context.
I can't remember the guy's name now. The guy who played for the Celtics. He was in the CBA. You remember him. Adrian? Was it Adrian?
Adrian Griffin.
Adrian Griffin, yes.
Human capital development, yeah. Gerald Oliver, the guy that was an assistant coach at Tennessee during the Bernie and Ernie years, was kind of his guru. Like,
Yeah.
work on. He was,
And I love that guy, and every team that I ever played for loved having him on the team, even if he played 6 minutes a game. They all loved having him on the team. And I just think you can find guys like that. That's just me. But one other thing I wanted to bring up here, Steve, is from Rowdy, who says, for Beal, it would have to be one of those situations where he picks Boston as a place he wants to go, and other teams basically say we're out because he wants to go play there. Could you see that happening? Could you see a situation where Beal says, I want to go play with Jason Tatum, and it becomes a situation where, almost like Anthony Davis with the Lakers, where you had to make a deal with them whether you like it or not?
I suppose, but if you're Washington, it's hard to, you're going to need something, and something should be reasonable. And let's say too, look, Beal can opt out of his contract, right? So he can be an unrestricted free agent. So, if he decides that I'm good financially, he can come here and they can clear space to get him something. But that's, I don't see that happening either. It's hard to leave dollars on the table, even if it's a situation where he really wants to come and play with Jason Tatum. And I've spoken enough to Bradley Beal over the few years to know that that's not just hey, we're buddies from St. Louis. Bradley Beal is kind of a mentor in a lot of ways, and there's a real legit closeness there. When I was looking to do a story on Jason Tatum's development, I'd go to Bradley Beal and say, okay, where do you see him? What does he need to do now? Because he'd tell you stuff even when maybe Celtic people wouldn't say, hey, Jason needs to do this, this, and this. So there's a true closeness there. Is it enough to get it done? I don't know.
Yeah.
But it would,
right. I mean, it's one thing to be close with somebody. It's another thing to take a $20 million contract rather than a $35 million contract.
Well,
I don't think Bradley Beal's doing that.
What would really be what could really make a Bradley Beal deal work for the Celtics and for the Wizards is if guys like Romeo Langford and Aaron Nesmith had value, if Celtics had built their value.
Yeah, right.
To the point where, oh, geez, I'm the Wizards. Yeah, give me a couple of those guys, that I can plug into my rotation right now, and I'll give you this guy who doesn't want to be here.
Yeah,
if that ends up being the case with Beal.
Yeah.
But right now, I mean, as much as I think Aaron Nesmith can be a real player, as much as I think Romeo Langford, if he could shake off the injury issues, he doesn't look like he's going 1,000 miles an hour, but he seems to get where he's going. I think those guys are good players. They're not the kind of guys that are going to allow you to trade a Bradley Beal for them and then face your crowd, face your season ticket holders.
Yeah, right. All right, well, Steve, thank you very much here on a Friday night, talking a little trade deadline ahead of Thursday's big day. We'll see. I'm 100% sure the Celtics will do something between now and then. It's just a matter of whether it's a small bookkeeping move or whether it's something more important than that. But we'll keep in touch, and we will see what happens next. So thank you to Steve Bulpett. Thank you to everybody who joined us, and we'll talk to you soon.